The darkness of space stretched across the galaxy like an impenetrable cloak. For centuries, civilizations had flourished, each species carving out its place in the vast expanse of stars. But now, all of that was about to change. A test was coming, a test that would either destroy every living thing or leave a chosen few standing. And the Deathworlders, the species no one had ever dared to underestimate, would be the last ones to stand. When the first signs of the test appeared, no one knew what to think. A strange cosmic disturbance, a ripple that cut across the universe, a pulse that resonated in every being's mind. Panic swept through the galaxy as species from all corners of the universe began to fall. Whole worlds were wiped from existence, and civilizations collapsed under the weight of an unseen force. It wasn't a plague. It wasn't a war. It wasn't something they could fight or outrun. It was a test that would measure their worth to survive. And most, if not all, had failed. But not the Deathworlders. While entire planets burned in silence, the Deathworlders thrived. They adapted with terrifying ease, making the impossible seem like a mere inconvenience. Where others had seen only destruction, they saw opportunity. In the face of overwhelming odds, they became something more, something unbreakable. But this test, this trial, was far from over. It wasn't just a war of strength or cunning, it was a game of survival, of outlasting the very forces of nature. Every species had crumbled beneath it. Every species, except for the Deathworlders. It was as if the test had been tailor-made for them, challenging them to prove they were more than mere survivors. They were destined to conquer. As the Deathworlders began to dominate, whispers spread across the galaxy. They had turned the test into a joke. The forces that had wiped out the others, those terrifying, unseen forces, seemed to bend at the will of the Deathworlders. What others had feared, they embraced. What others had run from, they crushed beneath their feet. In their eyes, the test was nothing more than a challenge to be conquered. Yet, no one truly understood what was at stake. Not yet. The test was more than survival, it was a warning. A challenge to the very heart of existence. And only the Deathworlders seemed to know what to do with it. The galaxy held its breath as the Deathworlders took the lead in the race to outlast the test. They hadn't just survived, it was as if they were mocking the very forces that had caused the destruction. No one could explain how, or why, but everyone was watching. What came next would change everything. Would the Deathworlders prove to be more than just survivors? Would they find a way to turn the tides and finally conquer the test, or would they, too, fall prey to the unknown force that had wiped out so many before them? No one knew. But one thing was certain, if the Deathworlders fell, there would be no one left to fight. The end of the galaxy would be inevitable. And so, as they stood at the edge of the unknown, the only question that remained was simple: could the Deathworlders make it through? Could they turn the impossible into a joke? Or would they, too, crumble like the others? The answer to that question would define the fate of the universe. The ripples across the galaxy had been unmistakable. In the blink of an eye, entire civilizations vanished, wiped out by a force that seemed too great to understand. From the farthest reaches of the galaxy to the heart of the most advanced empires, every species was shaken by the same terrifying reality. No one knew what this test truly was, only that it arrived without warning, and the consequences were immediate and brutal. It started small, just a whisper in the air. A subtle, unexplainable change in the fabric of space. No one took it seriously at first. But soon, the whispers grew louder, the sky darker, and the stars themselves seemed to flicker out one by one. The first to fall were the peaceful civilizations, those who had always relied on diplomacy, trade, and intellect to navigate the universe. It didn't take long for them to realize that no amount of negotiation could save them. The threat was too powerful, too swift. Then, as if the universe had a cruel sense of humor, the great military empires began to collapse. Their soldiers, the mightiest warriors across galaxies, were overwhelmed by the strange forces. Entire fleets vanished without a trace, as if the very essence of their being had been erased. Desperation spread like wildfire. Mankind, the most diverse and tenacious of species, found itself scrambling for answers as worlds burned and cities fell silent. Even their greatest minds had no answer, no hope, only the cold realization that they were losing this fight. And then came the Deathworlders. They were a species forged through the harshest environments. To them, survival was not a challenge, it was a way of life. Their worlds were the most hostile in the galaxy, where nothing was easy, and death lurked at every corner. They had learned to thrive in the face of unimaginable danger. So, when the test arrived, they didn't run. They didn't panic. They stood tall. For the Deathworlders, this test wasn't just an obstacle, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to prove their resilience once again, to show the universe that no matter the odds, they could handle anything. They were the last ones standing, and they made that fact known to the galaxy. They took every challenge in stride, showing no fear, no hesitation. The other species watched in disbelief as the Deathworlders marched forward, unstoppable. At first, no one understood why the Deathworlders were immune to the effects of the test. It wasn't just their physical strength, it was something deeper. Their bodies, hardened by generations of hardship, seemed to absorb the chaos that was tearing apart the galaxy. Their minds, honed through years of surviving in environments where death was the only constant, adapted with an ease that stunned everyone. But even the Deathworlders could not deny that this test was unlike anything they had ever faced. It wasn't just about physical prowess, it was about survival on a scale no one could have predicted. As the Deathworlders pushed forward, they encountered something far beyond what they had ever imagined. It began as a strange feeling, an unsettling presence that seemed to hang in the air. The Deathworlders weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting something far more insidious. Something that moved beyond space and time, beyond logic and reason. It was as if the universe itself was shifting, changing, warping to test them. They began to realize that this was no ordinary test. The forces they were facing weren't simply external. They were inside their minds, twisting their very perceptions of reality. What was real and what was illusion became a blur. They found themselves surrounded by hallucinations, by shadows that whispered to them, telling them they would fall. And yet, the Deathworlders held firm. Their minds were their strongest weapons, and they would not falter. As the test continued, the Deathworlders grew more confident. They began to rally their allies, other species who had managed to survive, or at least who had not yet been fully destroyed by the forces at play. But every time they thought they were gaining ground, the test evolved again, becoming more unpredictable. New threats appeared from the depths of space, unknown dangers that seemed designed to break them. The Deathworlders' strength was being tested to the limits, but they still held on. With each passing day, the question grew more urgent. How long could they keep this up? Could they truly outlast the forces that had decimated the other species? Or was this test designed for one purpose only, to prove that no one, no matter how resilient, could survive? Despite the mounting challenges, the Deathworlders stood firm. They refused to be victims of this test. Instead, they saw it as a chance to prove that, in the darkest of times, they would rise above. They would be the last ones standing, not just by survival, but by defying the very forces that sought to crush them. But as they advanced, an even deeper question loomed in their minds. What if the test wasn't about survival at all? What if it was about something greater? Something that would challenge them in ways they hadn't even considered. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. The Deathworlders were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting to prove something far more important. And whatever the test was, they knew they couldn't afford to fail. The test had become more than a fight for survival. It was now a race against time, a battle not just for the future of the Deathworlders, but for the very essence of existence itself. As each passing day brought new challenges, the Deathworlders began to question everything they knew. The test was no longer just about fighting, it was about understanding, adapting, and evolving faster than any other species could. The first sign that things were escalating came when they encountered the shadows. At first, the Deathworlders thought they were merely illusions, strange products of their stress, or perhaps the work of some malevolent force trying to break their resolve. But as the shadows became more frequent, their nature more intense, it became clear that these were no mere figments of their imagination. The shadows seemed to be able to manipulate the environment, warping space and time, making it impossible to predict where the next danger would strike. They moved like ghosts, almost imperceptible to the eye, yet everywhere at once. The Deathworlders tried to fight back, using their natural instincts and advanced weaponry, but the shadows weren't physical, they were something far more insidious. Their very presence played tricks on the mind, distorting reality, making even the most seasoned warriors question what was real. One of the Deathworlders, a seasoned fighter known for his incredible resilience, stepped forward. He wasn't afraid of the shadows, in fact, he embraced the chaos they brought. His philosophy was simple: fear is the enemy, doubt is the killer. So, he led the charge, walking boldly into the fog of confusion and destruction. His comrades followed, unsure of what to expect, but they trusted him. He had survived the harshest environments, and if he said the shadows could be defeated, they believed him. It was a mistake. The deeper they ventured into the mist, the more disorienting the experience became. The shadows seemed to feed off their fear, amplifying their doubts, warping their memories. Each step forward made the environment seem more alien, more hostile. The battle became not just one of physical strength, but of willpower. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting to maintain their sanity. The warrior who had led them began to falter. His mind, once sharp and unyielding, started to blur. His thoughts grew clouded, and the fear that had been buried deep within him began to surface. The shadows could manipulate not just the world around them, but the very minds of their victims. They didn't need to kill them with weapons or force, they simply needed to make them question their purpose, their place in the universe. Once doubt took root, the Deathworlders were as vulnerable as any other species. But in that moment of weakness, something incredible happened. One of the younger Deathworlders, a rookie who had barely survived his first few skirmishes, stepped forward. He had no battle experience, no deep knowledge of the harshness that had shaped their people. But he had something the others didn't have, an unshakable belief in himself. He wasn't afraid of what he didn't understand. While the others struggled to hold on to their grip on reality, he saw the shadows for what they were, manifestations of fear and doubt, no more real than the stories told to frighten younglings. With an almost childlike simplicity, he spoke to the shadows, not with anger or fear, but with pure clarity. "You're not real," he said. "You're just in our heads. And if we don't believe in you, you have no power over us." It was a simple truth, but in that moment, it shattered the illusion. The shadows began to lose their form, flickering in and out like the fading remnants of a bad dream. The Deathworlders rallied, pushing back against the darkness in their minds, breaking free from the grip of doubt and fear that had tried to break them. They fought with renewed strength, their unity and resolve outweighing the phantom threats that had tried to tear them apart. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Deathworlders felt hope. But that hope was fleeting, because just as one trial ended, another began. The test was not over. It was simply evolving, growing more dangerous with each turn. And so, with the shadows behind them, the Deathworlders pressed on. But they knew something now: they were not fighting just for survival anymore. They were fighting for something far greater, for the strength to never give up, to never let fear control them, no matter what form it took. As they continued their journey, the forces that had once seemed unbreakable began to shift. The test was no longer just about the strength of their bodies, but the strength of their minds. It was a test not of survival, but of perseverance, of the will to push forward when every instinct told them to stop. The Deathworlders faced the impossible, but they knew one thing for certain: they would not be broken. Not by the shadows. Not by the test. And certainly not by anything that dared to challenge them. The stakes had never been higher. The test was changing, adapting, becoming more dangerous with every step. And though the Deathworlders were the last species standing, they knew they were not out of the woods yet. The final challenge awaited them, and it would take everything they had to face it. The Deathworlders had learned many things since the test began. They had learned that no obstacle was too great if they stood together. They had learned that their strength wasn't just in their bodies, but in their minds, in their hearts. They had learned to trust one another, even when everything around them seemed to fall apart. But now, they were about to face something that would challenge everything they thought they knew. The shadows had been only the beginning. The test was evolving, adapting to their every move, becoming more complex with each passing moment. As the Deathworlders moved forward, they encountered something that made their previous challenges seem almost trivial by comparison. It wasn't a creature, a weapon, or even a force of nature. No, what awaited them was something far more dangerous, a puzzle. The Deathworlders had faced wars, storms, and the cruelest of nature's trials. But this was different. It wasn't something they could fight or defeat with brute strength. It wasn't something they could shoot, punch, or destroy. It was a mental challenge, a test of intellect, patience, and strategy. A labyrinth stretched out before them, an endless maze that shifted with every step they took, each path leading to a dead end or a trap. The walls of the maze seemed to breathe, alive with a strange energy. The air grew thick with tension, and every turn they took only seemed to bring them deeper into the heart of the maze. It was as if the maze itself had been designed specifically for them, to make them question their every move, to make them second-guess themselves at every turn. At first, the Deathworlders tried to rely on their physical prowess. They charged forward, crashing through walls, cutting down anything in their path. But nothing worked. Every attempt to break through only led them further into the maze, deeper into its twisted, unyielding heart. The harder they fought, the more it felt like they were being toyed with, like the very test was mocking them. In desperation, they began to slow down, thinking more carefully. They searched for patterns, for clues that could help them navigate this nightmare. But there was no rhyme or reason to the maze. No logic they could grasp. No pattern to follow. And then, something strange happened. One of the younger Deathworlders, who had been quiet up until this point, stepped forward with a calm that none of the others had expected. He was an outsider, not known for his combat skills or his strength, but for his intelligence and insight. He had been the one to question their assumptions, the one to suggest that perhaps the test wasn't about fighting or winning, but about understanding. "I think I know what we're supposed to do," he said softly, his voice steady. "We need to stop trying to fight the maze. We need to trust it." Once doubt took root, the Deathworlders were as vulnerable as any other species. But in that moment of weakness, something incredible happened. One of the younger Deathworlders, a rookie who had barely survived his first few skirmishes, stepped forward. He had no battle experience, no deep knowledge of the harshness that had shaped their people. But he had something the others didn't have, an unshakable belief in himself. He wasn't afraid of what he didn't understand. While the others struggled to hold on to their grip on reality, he saw the shadows for what they were, manifestations of fear and doubt, no more real than the stories told to frighten younglings. With an almost childlike simplicity, he spoke to the shadows, not with anger or fear, but with pure clarity. "You're not real," he said. "You're just in our heads. And if we don't believe in you, you have no power over us." It was a simple truth, but in that moment, it shattered the illusion. The shadows began to lose their form, flickering in and out like the fading remnants of a bad dream. The Deathworlders rallied, pushing back against the darkness in their minds, breaking free from the grip of doubt and fear that had tried to break them. They fought with renewed strength, their unity and resolve outweighing the phantom threats that had tried to tear them apart. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Deathworlders felt hope. But that hope was fleeting, because just as one trial ended, another began. The test was not over. It was simply evolving, growing more dangerous with each turn. And so, with the shadows behind them, the Deathworlders pressed on. But they knew something now, they were not fighting just for survival anymore. They were fighting for something far greater, for the strength to never give up, to never let fear control them, no matter what form it took. As they continued their journey, the forces that had once seemed unbreakable began to shift. The test was no longer just about the strength of their bodies, but the strength of their minds. It was a test not of survival, but of perseverance, of the will to push forward when every instinct told them to stop. The Deathworlders faced the impossible, but they knew one thing for certain: they would not be broken. Not by the shadows. Not by the test. And certainly not by anything that dared to challenge them. The stakes had never been higher. The test was changing, adapting, becoming more dangerous with every step. And though the Deathworlders were the last species standing, they knew they were not out of the woods yet. The final challenge awaited them, and it would take everything they had to face it. The Deathworlders had learned many things since the test began. They had learned that no obstacle was too great if they stood together. They had learned that their strength wasn't just in their bodies, but in their minds, in their hearts. They had learned to trust one another, even when everything around them seemed to fall apart. But now, they were about to face something that would challenge everything they thought they knew. The shadows had been only the beginning. The test was evolving, adapting to their every move, becoming more complex with each passing moment. As the Deathworlders moved forward, they encountered something that made their previous challenges seem almost trivial by comparison. It wasn't a creature, a weapon, or even a force of nature. No, what awaited them was something far more dangerous: a puzzle. The Deathworlders had faced wars, storms, and the cruelest of nature's trials. But this was different. It wasn't something they could fight or defeat with brute strength. It wasn't something they could shoot, punch, or destroy. It was a mental challenge, a test of intellect, patience, and strategy. A labyrinth stretched out before them, an endless maze that shifted with every step they took, each path leading to a dead end or a trap. The walls of the maze seemed to breathe, alive with a strange energy. The air grew thick with tension, and every turn they took only seemed to bring them deeper into the heart of the maze. It was as if the maze itself had been designed specifically for them, to make them question their every move, to make them second-guess themselves at every turn. At first, the Deathworlders tried to rely on their physical prowess. They charged forward, crashing through walls, cutting down anything in their path. But nothing worked. Every attempt to break through only led them further into the maze, deeper into its twisted, unyielding heart. The harder they fought, the more it felt like they were being toyed with, like the very test was mocking them. In desperation, they began to slow down, thinking more carefully. They searched for patterns, for clues that could help them navigate this nightmare. But there was no rhyme or reason to the maze. No logic they could grasp. No pattern to follow. And then, something strange happened. One of the younger Deathworlders, who had been quiet up until this point, stepped forward with a calm that none of the others had expected. He was an outsider, not known for his combat skills or his strength, but for his intelligence and insight. He had been the one to question their assumptions, the one to suggest that perhaps the test wasn't about fighting or winning, but about understanding. "I think I know what we're supposed to do," he said softly, his voice steady. "We need to stop trying to fight the maze. We need to trust it." The others stared at him, unsure of what he meant. To trust the maze? It was a trap. They had been fighting it for what felt like forever, and now they were supposed to trust it? But the young one was insistent. He explained that the maze wasn't trying to kill them, it was trying to guide them. They had been so focused on defeating it that they had missed its true purpose. If they stopped trying to break it, if they stopped trying to force their way through, they might just find the path they were looking for. It wasn't an easy decision. The Deathworlders were warriors, accustomed to using force to solve problems. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with weapons. This was a puzzle, and they had to think their way out of it. Reluctantly, they agreed to follow his lead. They slowed down, stepping carefully through the maze, their every movement deliberate. At first, it seemed like they were getting nowhere. Every turn led to another dead end. The frustration mounted, and doubt began to creep in again. But then, something shifted. The walls of the maze seemed to open up, just a little. A new path appeared, leading them forward. And then another. Slowly but surely, the maze began to reveal itself, its secrets unlocking one step at a time. The Deathworlders soon realized that they weren't just navigating the maze physically, they were changing their approach, adapting mentally. They were learning not just to survive, but to understand the very nature of the test. It wasn't about brute strength or firepower. It was about growth. It was about changing. About bending, rather than breaking. The maze led them to a great chamber at the center, a room filled with an ancient energy. At its heart stood an object unlike anything they had ever seen, a relic, old and powerful. It was clear that this was the next phase of the test. But there was no immediate danger. No force trying to destroy them. For the first time, they felt like they were in control. They had solved the riddle. They had faced the impossible and found a way through it. The puzzle was not meant to break them, it was meant to teach them. But as they stood there, victorious, the reality of the situation began to set in. The test was far from over. The maze was just one part of a larger, more complex challenge. The Deathworlders had passed the first stage, but what lay ahead was unknown, and it would require every ounce of their strength, intelligence, and courage to overcome. And they knew, deep down, that the final test would be the hardest of all. The relic in the center of the chamber hummed with a strange, almost hypnotic energy. It pulsed, as if alive, as if it were connected to the very core of the universe itself. The Deathworlders stood around it, still trying to make sense of what they had just discovered. The maze, which had once seemed insurmountable, had revealed a deeper truth: the test wasn't meant to break them. It was meant to shape them, to push them beyond the limits of their understanding. And in this moment, as they stood before the relic, they knew they had come closer to understanding the true nature of the challenge. The young Deathworlder who had led them through the maze stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the relic. "We've made it this far," he said, his voice steady, but filled with wonder. "But we're not done yet. We've only unlocked one piece of the puzzle." The others nodded in agreement. They had all seen the same thing: the test wasn't over. The relic, though powerful, wasn't the end. It was a key, a tool that would help them move forward. But to what end, none of them could say. As they studied the relic, a voice echoed in their minds. It was soft at first, barely a whisper, but it grew clearer as they focused on it. The voice wasn't one they recognized, but it was not hostile either. It felt familiar. Like something deep within them had always known it was there. "You have proven your worth," the voice said. "But the true test lies ahead. You will face a choice that will determine the fate of all." The Deathworlders exchanged uneasy glances. A choice? What kind of choice? And what fate did the voice speak of? Before they could ask further, the chamber around them began to shift. The walls rippled, and the very air seemed to hum with a new energy. The path forward became clear, another door had opened, leading them out of the chamber and into the unknown. They stepped forward, their hearts heavy with uncertainty, but also with hope. The test had taken so much from them already: sacrifices had been made, doubts had been faced, and fears had been conquered. But in that moment, they felt a new kind of strength, one that came not just from survival, but from understanding. They had learned that the test wasn't just about surviving the impossible, it was about growing, evolving, and adapting. The next phase of the test was unlike anything they had encountered before. The environment shifted around them, and the very landscape seemed to change as if the universe itself was shifting in response to their movements. What lay before them wasn't a puzzle, a maze, or even a monster. It was an entirely new world, one that seemed to stretch on forever. They had no choice but to move forward, even though they knew that every step brought them closer to the final confrontation. The unknown loomed ahead, and they could feel the weight of the test bearing down on them, pressing harder with every passing moment. But this time, they were not afraid. This time, they were ready. Days turned into weeks as the Deathworlders pushed forward, their resolve growing stronger with each trial they faced. The challenges they encountered were no longer just physical. They began to test their unity, their trust in one another, and their ability to hold on to the lessons they had learned. The test had been more than just a trial of survival, it had been a journey of self-discovery. They encountered strange, alien landscapes, each one more treacherous than the last. They fought against unimaginable forces, their bodies and minds pushed to the breaking point. But with each victory, no matter how small, they grew stronger. And with each failure, they learned. The universe had thrown everything at them, but they had learned to adapt. They had learned to trust themselves. It wasn't just about strength anymore. It was about wisdom. It was about finding a way to face the impossible and emerge stronger, no matter what. As they ventured deeper into this new world, they encountered remnants of the other species who had failed the test. Some had turned to dust, their civilizations wiped from existence. Others were still alive, but broken, lost in their own fear and doubt. The Deathworlders knew they couldn't afford to become like them. They couldn't afford to let fear or uncertainty take hold. And then, the voice spoke again. "You are close," it said, this time with a sense of finality. "You have proven yourselves worthy. But there is one final lesson you must learn. It is not about surviving. It is not about strength. It is about something much more important." The Deathworlders stopped in their tracks, waiting for the voice to continue. "You must choose," the voice said. "What will you fight for? Will you fight for power? For survival? Or will you fight for something greater? The fate of all depends on the choice you make." The Deathworlders stood silent, the weight of the question heavy upon them. They had fought for so long, endured so much. But now, it was clear, the test was about more than just physical endurance. It was about purpose. It was about what they believed in, what they stood for. For the first time in the test, they didn't just have to survive, they had to choose who they were going to become. And so, they made their decision. The Deathworlders stood on the precipice of the unknown, the voice's words echoing in their minds like a drumbeat, urging them to make their choice. It was a question that demanded a deep reflection on who they were and what they stood for. Their survival had always been about grit, strength, and unity. But now, the test had evolved again, this time, it was about something far more profound. It was about the very essence of their purpose. The landscape before them had transformed into something more abstract, almost otherworldly. The sky shimmered with strange, swirling colors, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, forming pathways and barriers that weren't there a moment before. It was as if the very fabric of reality had become malleable, as if the universe itself was watching them, waiting for their next move. And then, the final test appeared before them, a massive, darkened chamber, vast and endless, stretching beyond the horizon. In the center of the chamber was an enormous crystal, glowing with an intense, unearthly light. The crystal pulsed with energy, as if it was alive, and its glow bathed the room in a strange, eerie glow. "This is it," one of the Deathworlders said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. "The final test." But as they approached the crystal, something unexpected happened. A series of figures appeared, ethereal beings that seemed to materialize out of thin air. They were the remnants of the species that had failed the test before them, their forms shattered, their minds broken by the very forces they had faced. They were not dead, but neither were they truly alive. They were trapped in a state of limbo, lost to their own doubts, fears, and failures. The Deathworlders understood immediately what this was. These were the consequences of choosing wrong, the result of succumbing to fear, doubt, and hopelessness. These were the beings who had fought for power, for survival, for the wrong reasons. They had failed the test, not because they lacked strength, but because they had forgotten the true purpose behind it. The Deathworlders had been given a choice, to fight for something greater than themselves, or to fall into the same trap as the others. And now, as they gazed upon the broken figures before them, they realized the weight of their decision. This wasn't just about them. It was about the future of the universe. It was about what they would leave behind, what they would inspire in others. The crystal before them flickered, casting strange shadows across the chamber. And then, the voice spoke again. You have come far, but the final choice is yours. What will you fight for? What is the true meaning of your survival? Choose wisely, for your decision will determine the fate of all who come after you. The Deathworlders stood in silence, the pressure mounting. The future of the galaxy, the fate of all life, hung in the balance. And yet, despite the overwhelming weight of the choice before them, they knew one thing for certain: they could not, and would not, become like the lost souls who stood before them. They had survived this far not just because they were the strongest or the most resourceful, but because they believed in something greater. They believed in unity. They believed in resilience. They believed that even in the face of impossible odds, there was always a way forward if they stayed true to themselves. The leader of the Deathworlders stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the crystal. His voice was steady, unwavering. We fight not for power. Not for survival. We fight for the future, for the hope that no matter what happens, no matter what challenges lie ahead, we will face them together. We fight for the ones who come after us. For the future generations who will learn from our mistakes, our successes, and our perseverance. We fight to make sure that the test of survival becomes a test of hope. The crystal's glow intensified, and for a moment, the entire chamber seemed to pulse with energy. The figures of the lost souls flickered and began to dissipate, their forms vanishing into the air like smoke, their voices fading into silence. And then, the final moment came. The Deathworlders stepped forward, united in purpose, and placed their hands upon the crystal. The chamber around them trembled, and the very ground beneath their feet shifted. The test was over. They had passed, not just by surviving, but by choosing the right path, the path of hope, unity, and a belief in something greater than themselves. The energy from the crystal surged through them, filling them with a power unlike anything they had ever felt. It was not a power of destruction, but a power of creation. A power that would enable them to rebuild, to inspire, and to lead the galaxy into a new era of unity and understanding. The test had been grueling, and the challenges they faced had seemed insurmountable at times. But now, as the crystal's light bathed them in its glow, they understood the true purpose of the test. It wasn't about survival. It was about proving that even in the darkest of times, even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was always hope. There was always a way forward. The Deathworlders had passed the test. But more importantly, they had proven that no matter what, the spirit of hope would always endure. The light from the crystal faded, and the chamber grew silent. The Deathworlders stood there, their minds still buzzing with the energy that had surged through them, but now it was clear, the test was truly over. The galaxy, the entire universe, had watched as they faced the impossible, overcame unimaginable challenges, and proved that they were not just survivors, but something more. The light had shown them the truth: survival wasn't enough. It was the purpose behind their survival that mattered. As the energy from the crystal settled, the Deathworlders looked around, seeing the vast, shifting landscape they had crossed. It was no longer a battlefield, no longer a place of endless struggle. It had transformed into a land of possibilities, a place where the universe had finally given them the chance to shape the future. They had passed the test, but now came the true challenge, the challenge of what they would do with their newfound power, their knowledge, and their unity. The voice, the guiding force that had spoken to them throughout the test, resonated one last time. You have chosen the path of hope. You have chosen to fight not for power or survival, but for something greater, for unity, for the future, for all that is yet to come. Your victory is not just your own. It is the victory of every species, of every soul that will follow in your footsteps. You have proven that even in the darkest times, there is always a way forward. The future belongs to those who believe in it, and you have shown that you are those who will carry it forward. The Deathworlders stood in reverence, realizing that their journey had not just been about survival, but about shaping the legacy they would leave behind. The universe was vast, full of unknowns, and there would be countless challenges ahead. But they now understood that strength was not the answer to every problem. The real strength was in choosing to act with purpose, to believe in something greater than oneself, and to lift up those around you. As they walked out of the chamber, they felt the weight of their decision settle deep in their bones. They knew that their victory was only the beginning. The test had been a harsh, unrelenting force, but it had prepared them for the challenges of the future. They would go on to rebuild, to guide, and to lead with the lessons they had learned. But more than that, they would show the universe that survival was not enough. True strength came from knowing when to fight, when to stand tall, and when to be vulnerable. It came from choosing hope over fear, unity over division, and action over passivity. The Deathworlders had turned a test that would have broken any other species into something they could control. They had proven that no matter how dire the circumstances, there was always a way forward. Their victory was not just about defeating the test, it was about showing the universe that the real power lies in what we choose to do, what we choose to fight for, and how we choose to face the future. And so, as they looked to the stars, they knew that their journey was far from over. The challenges of the galaxy awaited them, but they no longer saw them as obstacles. They saw them as opportunities to prove that, no matter the odds, the Deathworlders would always rise. They would stand together, united in purpose, ready to face whatever the universe had in store. For the Deathworlders, the lesson was simple: survival was only the first step. The true victory was in how they chose to live, and how they chose to leave the world better than they found it. The galaxy was theirs to shape, and they would do so with hope, courage, and the belief that no challenge was too great when faced with the right mindset. The story of the Deathworlders had ended, but the story of the galaxy was just beginning. And in that story, hope would always be the light that guided them forward.